So now to the working with VariAudio. You already can see that most of the notes that are in my vocal part are pretty good. Not all of them, so we can do slight changes to them, but I used a loop from a library and of course the notes are not completely out of tune. So what you've got to do if you want to correct the pitch of your vocal tracks is you've got to get some experience. So not everything that Cubase will show you automatically is good for you and correct, and sometimes it will help you a lot if you do some slight manual changes. So this is one note. If you select it and use your up and down arrow keys, it will snap basically to an absolute pitch because I checked it over here. But that doesn't mean that the note is now perfectly in tune, because you see the white line shows that the pitch is not overall really good. Or let's say the singer worked with some articulation that makes the note slightly higher, then goes a little lower, goes higher again, and then goes into another one. So these are all changes that happen in one note. One thing you can do to correct the pitch of your note is to use the Quantize button. Right now I can't, you see, even if I go up to 100%, nothing happens because I already used the snap to absolute pitch. So even if my note is lower here and higher here, Cubase takes like the middle of all the different pitches and snaps it to the C sharp. If I undo that and click on it again, you see now the slider for quantization appears and I could do a slight pitch quantization. But since Cubase already thinks it is really good in pitch, nothing or not a lot happens. If you would go like, well, I'm just gonna use the slider to 100% and do that over here as well, and so on. What might happen is this over here. You see, in between the two notes, at first it was more like a wave because it was natural the way the women sung this part, but now it is like a really harsh change from one to another note. This will sound unnatural. So if you use the quantization and flatten the curve to a high degree, it will produce unnatural sounding notes. So if I play that,
feel drain, feel drain,
you can hear what the woman wanted to sing. If I quantize it and flatten the curve,
feel drain,
you can already hear that it starts to sound artificial. The reason why you can't hear it a lot right now is because the woman sings with a lot of breath and less tone, so the changes are not that artificial like in another part. This is, for example, something you should look for. So if you don't want to make your vocals too artificial, then don't produce these really strong changes in between the notes. That will make it sound artificial. And if you use VariAudio at all, you should probably think before you use it, do you want to use it or do you have to use it? Is it a real natural sounding soul or bluesy or rock voice where the pitch doesn't have to be that perfect in tune? Or did the singer use a lot of articulation and plays around with the pitch? Then you probably want to be less aggressive with your correction than in pop or dance music. So you see in this note, it is higher here and lower here. That sometimes happens because singers would go from one note straight into the other, and they probably start a little flat or sharp and then they go back to a better pitch in the end. Sometimes it happens like this. They have a really good pitch in the middle and in the end they change it for articulation reasons. Then you could use a tool that looks like this. You see, I can rotate my curve. And since in the beginning it was lower and in the end it was higher, I would just tilt the curve a little until it is more straight in the middle. That might result, you can see here and here, in changes where the note goes over into another one. So if you want to reduce that, you probably should adjust the length of the segment you're working on. That is also important, like I said before, for the parts where Cubase didn't analyze anything. You should check if this part belongs to that note or maybe to that, or if it's a note and you want to produce a segment of its own for that note. Another thing you can do is use the straighten the curve button. That you can find over here as a slider or over here if you hover with your mouse to the rectangular button on the top. So if you do so, you can see my curve is now really going up and down. If you do so, you can straighten the curve until it's really flat. Then it will sound probably very unnatural, or you can use it to a less strong degree and just correct the overall pitch of the curve a little like so. Sometimes, if you do that, you see you have two notes and the line is going directly from one into the other. And if I straighten my curve, you can see what happens is this really unnatural change that I talked about before, and that you don't want to have. So there's one possibility to reduce that to some degree, and that is the slider over here. That white area that appears shows a part where the flatten curve button does not work. So if I now use my flatten the curve button, you see it won't affect this part over here where the note changes. And that is the part that sounds most unnatural. So if I use this slider to keep the change natural, then I can use the flatten the curve button a lot, and it won't sound that unnatural.
Nothing's the same. Nothing's the same.
As if I don't use it.
Nothing's the
Can you hear the difference? It's a real big difference.
Nothing's the same.
In the change from one note to another. If the curve comes down here, you probably want to put an anchor over here and just straighten the curve like this. You can do the same over here because it was a little flat in the end, and pull the curve up so you have an overall line that is more in the middle. So if you use the quantization button, the function will not be confused because it is very low in the end and very high in the beginning. So now we have a more straighter curve. You could even use the straighten the curve button a little, and you just have to use it to a lesser degree because you already did some changes manually. Sometimes VariAudio is not very accurate in finding the pitch. That is probably due to a not very well sung part. But here in this note, you can see here it is really low and here it is really high. So the curve shows over two different half steps. That probably means that Cubase produced one note even though there should be two different ones. Let's listen to it.
Somewhere else.
You hear that?
Somewhere else.
So the woman sings just slightly up to this pitch and goes down to another pitch, but she sings it as one note, so Cubase didn't find a right point to produce two segments. That you've got to do manually, and therefore you go down in the segment until your mouse changes to a scissor. You look where the pitch changes from high to low. That is somewhere here. You can also check with your grid. Maybe she did sing really good in time and she wanted it to change for and on the offbeat. So you would just use your scissors to produce two different pitches, or even because she started lower and sang up into the next note, probably would produce three different pitches. And you see right now it worked really good. We have a C sharp, D, and C sharp, and that is most likely what she was supposed to sing. What is really important is you should always check with your band. So I imported this loop and produced a little backing track so that I can hear if something went really wrong or if I like what I was doing. So one more fun thing you can do with VariAudio or other programs that work like such is that you can create harmonies, but I have to say that these are mostly for arranging or songwriting purposes, just that you can hear what it would sound like. I think they are mostly not usable if you want to have real good vocal tracks. Unless it is okay for you that they sound not natural and you just want to put them very soft in the background and you have really good lead vocals, then it might be possible. So to show you what I mean, I produced this short part here and I used a loop from the vocal loops that are included in Cubase and put it here. I opened it and let VariAudio analyze the waveform, and then I duplicated the track twice. So here and here again. Then I checked for my key and the harmonies, and I opened all of these and used the auto mode coloring scheme. So here I went for auto because then all the notes of one track get the same color. So now you can see I have my lead vocals here. I have my first backings here and my second backing vocals down here. What I did was, like I said, I let Cubase analyze the audio material of my lead vocal loop. I duplicated it and then just used my up and down arrows to change the pitch from where it was. So it was here. And I just went down so many half steps until I could produce a second or a third vocal track that would fit to my lead vocals. You can do this if you know music theory. You can do this if you have a chord track and Cubase already knows the information, or you can do it just by try and error and using your ears. That doesn't matter. It probably takes up a little bit more time. But that was basically what I did. So I went here to my duplicated track. I selected an event and used the arrow keys and laid down these notes lower than my lead vocals so it would sound fitting to my lead vocals and the harmonies. The same I did with my second backing parts that I put even lower. So now I have stacked 3 vocal lines and the lead vocals itself sounds something like this. And the second sounds like this, a little bit lower. And the second backings even a little lower. So like I said, this is not a possibility to get a real good choir or real natural sounding vocals. But let's say I have lead vocals from a loop or somebody sung it for me and I just want to produce a little choir just to see what it sounds like and to check out some arrangements. Then I could use the method that I use, duplicate my lead vocals and change the pitches of the second or third vocal. And if I put them a little bit in the background and to the sides and I leave the lead vocals louder and the second and third voice softer, and in the background it won't sound that bad anymore.
Voila, la la la, c'est moi, voila.
So that is how they sound all three together, and if I play them back with my little backing track that I made for this purpose, then you won't hear the changes that strong anymore because the vocals are that soft, but you will still hear the choir that will give the tune a certain feel. So you see, that worked really well. Like I said, it's just for arranging or producing reasons, but now I've got a good feeling how my vocals could sound or what the backing singers could or might do when they come back in the studio, and that is what I wanted in the first place. So one more thing that is important for VariAudio is if you want to hear what you're doing right now, you've got to activate the acoustic feedback button, and that is the one on top here. If I deactivate it and I apply changes, you won't hear anything. So if you press that button and change the pitch, you can immediately hear what you're doing. So that takes some time to get used to these functions. Like I said, the smart controls are really helpful. Check out my other videos so you can use them in a practical way. Take a loop and do some changes. Try to train your ear. Try to find out what the buttons do, what this all means, how they work, what you can do, what you should do, what you probably shouldn't, or how much of this you can apply until it starts to sound unnatural. If you want unnatural, you can of course use it to a higher degree.
Nothing's the same.
And you get this artificial voice.
Nothing's the same.
You can do so by using the Quantize and straighten the curve button a lot, but also if you change your formants to some degree up or down.
Nothing's the same.
Like I said, that needs some experience, and if you want to use that tool, which is a really good tool and really helpful, you have to try and train your ear a little and just take a sample like me, do the changes that won't do any harm, and then if you have to apply it to a real important track, you already know how it works.